Hello and welcome to another edition of Betfair's AFL Trade Talk, another big weekend of footy. I'm here with Darren Parkin and we're going to dissect everything and have a look at all the action on the Betfair exchange. But how are you, Daz? How was the weekend?
Yeah, pretty good weekend of footy. Not necessarily many upsets, I guess. There were a couple of 50-50 games that were pretty telling. Essendon's win, Carlton keeping their season alive against Fremantle, Richmond hitting back against Sydney, and we realistically probably lost 3 finals contenders, even though a couple of them are still in the mix. But you'd think Sydney, Fremantle and the Gold Coast are going to find it difficult now, particularly given the Gold Coast have put themselves in caretaker mode for the rest of the year.
So plenty to discuss there. But 3 games we're going to have a quick look at. The first one is Carlton and the Dockers. The Blues get a win over in the West, a massive win against the Dockers, and Sam Walsh was performing, Adam Cerra, Paddy Cripps continues his great form, and the forwards are going gangbusters at the moment. While not killing the score sheet in terms of, or smashing the score sheet in terms of goals, there seems to be a real cohesion at the Blues there in the forward line.
Yeah, very different to what we saw. The tipping point was kind of that Essendon game where they kicked, I think, 6 goals, 16 from 60-odd entries. They had similar issues against the Bulldogs in a loss and Brisbane in a loss, but it starts to be clicking for them now, though, or seems to be clicking for them. They've won their last 3 by more than 50 points. Obviously, Gold Coast at the MCG, Hawthorn at the MCG, now Fremantle away. I think they've won 4 of their last 5 in Perth against the Dockers and something like 6 of their last 7 in Perth in general. So they seem to enjoy it, and it's going to be fascinating watching Carlton in the run to the line now in the back end of the year, because they've found their mojo and obviously big chance against Port Adelaide this week.
What's the biggest story? Blues are back or the Dockers are just gone?
Probably Fremantle, because I think Carlton, obviously, they'd want to tick a few more boxes, I guess, before they're officially declared that, but they're certainly motoring again. And clearly for Carlton, they're demonstrating what they are capable of. But I think Fremantle, their slides, they've really only played a month of good footy this year before the bye, and then that was really it for them, which has been pretty disappointing.
Yeah, we are going to touch on Fremantle a little bit later in the show in our deep dive. But St Kilda and Melbourne, it was another great game at the MCG, and just St Kilda had no luck whatsoever. You would have been pretty frustrated with that, Daz.
Yeah, in the first minute, obviously, opening contest, Max King's shoulder pops out. He's out for the season. Seb Ross, who came in on the back of a knee issue, did a hammy and out for a month, you'd think. And then Zane Cordy, who they picked to give them some tall reinforcements, got concussed, all of that in the first 20 minutes of the game. They did a fair bit right, St Kilda, in terms of their intensity and effort. They still had the problem that's plagued them a bit in recent weeks, and that's when they go forward. They're just not generating scores. They're struggling to hit targets. They seem to kick to opposition intercept markers all the time. They did it to Harris Andrews, James Sicily, and clearly Stephen May, obviously not playing on Max King, helped him, but I thought St Kilda were brave and gallant, but at the same time fell short, and Melbourne go back into the top 4.
I just want to say that one of my favourite players in the AFL is Rowan Marshall. He had 95% game time and he had 30 disposals. He's a dead set freak. I think he's the best ruckman in the competition purely because of his versatility. He's just such a barometer for St Kilda, and when he's playing well, St Kilda obviously are as well. I really like the performance of St Kilda, despite those injury issues, which could have given them the excuse to lose by 50, 60, 70 points. They really stuck it out. I'm just having a look at the time on ground. Callum Wilkie had 100%. Dougal Howard had 100%. Mason Wood, 96%.
For a wingman, that's obviously quite high. Yeah.
Very, very high. Anthony Chiamiti, 96. And then Rowan Marshall there on 95 as a ruckman. Give the guys a break. I think it was a great performance from the Sainers.
Yeah, and look, Rowan Marshall playing on Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy, who have probably been the modern era's 2 best ruckmen in the same team, and was able to get the jump on them and the wood on them. But St Kilda, I guess, have got to try to use that as a turning point. They've been pretty up and down or patchy in games for about 2 months, and that was probably their most committed, consistent effort for a long time. So they have to turn that into something. But for Melbourne, it's an important 4 points. We know that Oliver still out and Bailey Fritsch will miss a bit of footy. They've got the likes of Brisbane, Adelaide, Essendon, those sorts of teams in the run home. So, it's good for them to build the points.
Before we move on to Gold Coast versus Port, I'll just add there that St Kilda, according to Stats Insider, our friends there, St Kilda is the most likely team to drop out of the 8. Currently, the Saints are a 57.1 chance of missing out on the top 8, which obviously makes it more likely than not. So hopefully a couple of big wins from the Saints could defy Stats Insider's predictions model there. But we're going to move on to the breaking news that Stuart Dew has been sacked as the Gold Coast coach. We've spoken about the Gold Coast Suns across the year, a team that we really think is progressive, and we're really on the side of the Gold Coast Suns. We think they're a good side, but there's just so many issues there in terms of media scrutiny and such. But they played Port on the weekend, and it was a performance where I don't think Gold Coast were that bad, Daz.
Yeah, I mean, look, overall they've had their lowest ebb probably over the last 3 games, where Collingwood belted them, Carlton belted them, and then this loss. This was much better than those previous 2 efforts. So in front at half time, they showed quite a bit. They even rallied again a little bit late when Port got on top, just to sort of finish the game a little bit better. It was really that third quarter where they gave up 9 goals, I think it was. And I guess that's their problem. They're still having a hard time controlling opposition run-ons. But they were 7-6 3 weeks ago, having beaten Adelaide and the Bulldogs in Darwin. They were looking a decent chance to push for the 8 at that point. And look, it's been poor over the last few weeks, but now you look at it and think that, there's been a bit going on behind the scenes. They're probably not all gelling because of the board versus the coach and all of that type of stuff. And now Stuart Dew's gone, and it feels like the Gold Coast doing what they've done before with Guy McKenna and various others. And I think, as we spoke about, clubs blink sometimes when they probably need to hold their line, and you can only assume that they've certainly got a target in mind and might be a bit further advanced in that conversation.
The Worm was in the favour of Gold Coast for the whole first half, besides a couple of minutes early in the first quarter. We're being really, really harsh on the Suns, and I think off the back of a performance that wasn't that bad. They did lose at home, yes, but they lost to a team that's won 13 on the trot and easily second flag favourites, have only lost 2 games for the year. Gold Coast is still a developing side. Even if they lose that by 60, 70, 80 points, I still don't think that that's worth a sacking. I really hope that people are clear in the media that, or it is of my opinion, that Damien Hardwick is the reason why Stuart Dew got sacked. He's not a bad coach. I'm pretty strong on that, Daz.
As we've said a number of times too, that coaches, in any walk of life, in any job, you're likely to be better at something second time you do it. The amount of coaches that don't get second chances because of the way the first one finished, and we'll certainly be hoping that in this situation that Stuart Dew can land himself in the system again, be it back at Hawthorn with Sam Mitchell, be it somewhere in Victoria, even back in South Australia. But you would hope that, Michael Voss was one that I think a lot of people thought that he wouldn't get a second chance, but, he went away and worked at Clubland at Port Adelaide and got another crack at it. Stuart Dew's made progress with his team, and I think certainly there'd be another opportunity for him in the AFL.
I think, just lastly, you mentioned Michael Voss. I think Stuart Dew would be a perfect candidate for a senior assistant coaching job at Carlton. Let's move on to the trade talk. Medal. Daz, tell us who the honourable mentions are this week first.
Yeah, there were a couple of blinders for Collingwood on Friday night against the Bulldogs. Nick Daicos, who may well end up with 3 votes. Isaac Quaynor played pretty well in that game. Darcy Parish and Zach Merritt were both pivotal in Essendon's win over the Crows. Harris Andrews took 1 million intercept marks. He probably only misses out because they've had a relatively soft kill and there wasn't huge pressure. And Adam Cerra was excellent for Carlton in their win over Fremantle in Perth. But one of his teammates has just nutted him, I think.
Yeah, so first vote, Sam Walsh had a fantastic game against Fremantle. His running power is just spectacular. And since he's got over that back injury and had a couple of rounds to get back into it, you could just see his work rate around the ground was terrific. Stephen Coniglio is having the best season of his career, and I can't believe he's a player that's not necessarily in Brownlow contention, but he's averaging the highest touches he's ever had in his career, goal assists, score assists, and also clearances. So he's having a fantastic season, and as you say, last for 3 votes was Stephen May against the Sainers. He was just terrific. For a key defender to be getting that much of the football and that many intercepts, it was a fantastic performance from Stephen May. Look, we're going to get into our deep dive. We're going to talk about the Fremantle Football Club, a club that we've spoken about in patches this year. We were pretty critical of them early. Then they had a really decent run where they won 4 or 5 games in a row, and we were talking about them as potential top 4 chances on the back of that run, given the value on the Betfair exchange. now they've just dropped off the face of the planet, does.
Yeah, you look at their season in 3 patches, 2 and 5 at the start of the year and in all sorts of bother. They then win 4 in a row with some good wins, Geelong, Melbourne at the MCG. Then they head to the bye and it just sapped all run again, 1 and 4 since then. And a few of the notes on, I guess, where that's happened for them. So from a numbers point of view, so last year their run to the finals, they were ranked 8th offensively. That's dropped down to 11th. But most alarmingly, they were the second best defensive team in the competition last year. They're now 14th in that space. So they're getting scored against far too heavily. That Giants game a couple of weeks ago was alarming, where they got opened right up. Carlton opened them right up. And obviously at the contest, they were 6th last year for contested possession, 14th this year. And obviously if they're losing that, they're then losing territory. 8th for inside 50s last year, 15th this year. And last year, one of the major features was their ability to travel. They went 8-2-1 on the road last year and beat Melbourne at the MCG. But if you look at flashpoints, last year they beat some of the games they were winning last year. They're losing those exact same games this year. They beat the Bulldogs at Marvel last year, lost that fixture this year. They beat St Kilda at Marvel last year, lost that fixture this year. Beat the Giants away last year, lost that fixture this year. So they're just dropping the games as a direct comparison point, and they're 2 and 5 on the road.
So we've got to think about what has changed in 12 months. Some of the positives, firstly, out of this year, Daz, what do you think they've been?
So Caleb Sarong's been elite. He's had a phenomenal season. I know he just got suspended as well, so that's going to hurt them for that game against Carlton. And obviously they play Collingwood at the MCG this week, so it's a pretty tough ask. Brayshaw's had another good year. His numbers match what he was producing. We spoke about Jai Amos being right in the rising star frame. He's been fantastic for a teenager playing in the forward line. Young, averaging 22 possessions a game, is another one who's been pretty good for them, but obviously they've just had too many guys that have gone the other way for them.
And what about negatives in terms of players? There's a few players at Fremantle that haven't had the best season.
So Will Brodie was the star last year, played every game, averaged 27 touches. He's been limited to just 5 matches this year. Played okay when he's been there, but hasn't had a run. Nat 5, still important to them. He's only played 8 games this year. He only played 7 last year, in fairness, so they can't get continuity in him. If you look at other comparison points, obviously they had Rory Lobb have a pretty strong finish last year. He's now gone. They bring in Luke Jackson from Melbourne as a similar player that can play ruck forward. And Jackson's had his moments, but he's just been okay. His form's probably mirrored Fremantle's form. He started poorly, got going for a while, and has sort of dropped back to the pack a little bit. So, yeah, when they've had guys go out, the guys that have come in haven't matched that output, and the team hasn't matched the output either.
Keen to discuss a little bit more about the ruckman situation at Freo. Just talking about Luke Jackson, I feel like there's a bit of a teething issue there. I'm not sure that Justin Longmuir quite knows what he wants to do with Luke Jackson. He's obviously actually been in terrific form. It was a bit down on form against Carlton, but finished the game really strong. His best football is easily when he's playing out of the front half of the ground. I think you hear a lot of media pundits say that they've got 2 ruckmen at Freo, but I don't think it should be like that. I think Luke Jackson should almost be a permanent forward that goes into the ruck once, twice per game, 3 times per game, just to give it a chop out to Sean Darcy, who really should be heroed in the ruck for as much as possible. He had 56 hitouts or something ridiculous on the weekend against Carlton, obviously undermanned in the ruck. But what do you think about that ruck situation and that dynamic there?
Yeah, he looks a tremendous prospect, Darcy, as we know, provided they can hang on to him long term. But it's that balance that clubs are trying to strike between, do you want 1 ruckman and a pinch hitter, or do you want 2 ruckmen? So you got Melbourne, obviously, with Grundy, I almost combined the 2 of them, with Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy. And obviously they're both elite players. And even that has worked most of the time, but not all of the time. You then look at St Kilda, who you spoke about. Rowan Marshall does most of their work. McInerney at Brisbane does most of their work. And I think Darcy's the type of player that could really build momentum into a game, rucking 90%, and then you can find another role for Jackson with his mobility. Similar to what he did at Melbourne. He was a pinch hitter at Melbourne, and I think Fremantle have tried to turn him into a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think obviously Darcy and Jackson are both fantastic players, and I just think Fremantle would be making the worst decision if they were to get rid of Darcy and try potentially get some draft picks in, because I don't think Jackson is a number 1 ruck. I think he plays his best footy in the forward half of the ground.
And he played a pivotal role when Melbourne won the flag. He went into the ruck in the third quarter and in a 10 or 15 minute burst was pivotal in them getting right on a run in that game. So I think certainly that type of role called upon when required, but asking him to do that all the time isn't necessarily the way to go.
I think one of the more underrated performances in a grand final, I thought Luke Jackson against in WA over there. So it's going to be interesting what we're going to get out of Fremantle over the next couple of weeks. They're not going to make finals, no. You'd have to say. So will be interesting to see the fallout for Freo towards the end of the year. Let's have a look at the market watchdog, Daz. And geez, I mean, we could talk about so many different things on the Betfair exchange, but we're going to kick off with the Brownlow.
Yeah, I think that the three guys towards the top of that market in terms of predicted votes in Daicos, Petrarca and Lachie Neale, there's a chance that all three of them get a three-voter this week. Daicos is the one that's shortened quite a bit, the other two not so much. So Daicos into sub $2 now at about $1.90, I think. Then you look at Petrarca and Neale, who would be only nipping at their heels, but a fair bit further out in that market as it stands. So again, you kind of look at whether that has reflected what's actually happening. So Lachie Neale stays at 12s. In fact, I think he was 11.60, so he's actually drifted a fraction. Christian Petrarca still around that $6 mark. He's likely to get 3, I would think, against St Kilda. So Daicos predicted to be about 5 votes ahead, but as we say, a lot of the predictor will work on 2.5s, 1.5s. 2.5s could become 3, 1.5s could become 2. So there's a chance that's a bit tighter than it seems. So I still think the value, as much as Daicos is probably going to win it.
Are there any other markets on the Betfair exchange that you would be interested? I mean, I'm going to throw out one, and that's the minor premiers market. We backed Collingwood at almost $2.70. They're into $1.26 after the win against Western Bulldogs on the weekend, and we've seen Port just drift slightly to $2.72. So it looks like Collingwood have all but locked in the minor premiership from an exchange point of view, but they're still equal on points there.
Yeah, that's right. And they play each other in Adelaide in about 2 weeks. So you think about what that market would be framed at. So Port Adelaide might be marginal favourites at home or even money, perhaps. So if they win that game, Port Adelaide, is there another loss that would allow Collingwood to get back on top of them? So yeah, it's fascinating that Collingwood are that short when the two sides play each other very soon.
Well, it's going to be very interesting the next couple of weeks. Obviously, Port have Carlton, who are in great form at the moment, and that's at Marvel Stadium. Carlton don't play fantastically there, but it's still going to be an absolute cracking game. We're going to go into the Brownlow predictor, and I'm going to read out the current predicted votes. So Nick Daicos still so solid on top with 27.5 votes. Christian Petrarca, 22.5, equal with Lachie Neale in equal second. And then third, Tim Taranto, who's just been a bit slow the last couple of weeks. He's on 20 votes. And then Zach Merritt, who's ineligible, on 19. Marcus Bontempelli, 18.5. And then Jordan Dawson, Adelaide's captain, there on 18. Having a look at the Brownlow predictor, Daz, is there anything that you would potentially want to do?
Probably at this stage, you'd be looking at just that next line down. So Daicos' odds are a bit prohibitive, even though he's certainly likely to win. But yeah, the Neale at double figures. Port Adelaide are interesting because it was Zach Butters making the move early. Connor Rosie's been the one in recent weeks that's probably picked up that mantle, so that they might end up cancelling each other out. The Jordan Dawson watch, so probably paying the price a bit for Adelaide being hot at home, cold away. So he'll get the votes. You know, that they play another home game this week. He's $16 in the market. Can he pick up another BOG there and shorten? So, yeah, I think that we're almost narrowing the pool down to Daicos, Petrarca, Neale.
I'm more than happy to lay it down to those three, having green positions on all of them. We're going to go over to our favourite segment. It's buy, hold, and sell, and I'll kick it off first. Daz, I'm buying Christian Petrarca. Obviously, it's Brisbane versus Melbourne this week, and it's going to be at the MCG. I'm buying Christian Petrarca for 30 plus disposals, and any line that's under the 30 disposals on the Betfair exchange, where you're getting fantastic prices. And I'm also going to continue to back him in the Brownlow medal. The reason why is because Christian Petrarca just simply loves the MCG, and he loves playing against Brisbane. There's only 3 other teams he averages more touches against. plus almost a goal a game. In the last 5 weeks, he's averaged 31.4 disposals. And that was before St Kilda on the weekend, where he had 20 disposals, but he predominantly played in the forward line, obviously kicking 4 goals. We also know that Brisbane don't play well at the G. And when we're talking about the Neil versus Petrarca battle, if Brisbane aren't going to win that, then you'd have to think that Neil won't get 3 votes, which gives the edge slightly to Petrarca. I know we spoke about this in the Richmond versus Brisbane battle a couple of weeks ago, where we saw Neil take on Taranto, and we almost saw their odds swap completely in the Brownlow, where Taranto was almost the third clear favourite, and Neil has now taken over that. So I'm buying Christian Petrarca, and I hope I've given a good case for him. Who are you buying this week, Daz?
Buying Essendon top 4 again based on the numbers. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. So they're a game behind Melbourne. So Melbourne currently hold that position, obviously. Essendon's percentage is not too bad. Melbourne's is a little bit better than that. But Essendon have a pretty good draw, but they also play a lot of teams around them, like Geelong, as we said, the Bulldogs they've got as well. And I think Essendon at $9.20 for top 4, Melbourne at about $1.50. A game between them. I still think that as much as Melbourne deserve to be favourites, if you look at that as a head-to-head, I think Essendon will probably win the most games. I've got Essendon finishing either 4th or 5th based on the fixture. So I reckon $9.20 for them, given the likes of the Bulldogs and the Crows and Geelong are shorter for top 4. I just think they represent a bit of value.
100%. Daz, who are you holding on this week?
Holding Geelong for the top 8. Certainly capable of getting there, but they've got a pretty tricky run home. Even their home games, there's no sitters amongst their home games. They've got Essendon at home, they've got the Bulldogs at home, they've got Port Adelaide at home. They also play Collingwood again at the MCG. They play Brisbane at the Gabba. They've got St Kilda at Marvel, so other sides that are around them. There's not a lot of soft kills, if you will, for Geelong. And I think at the moment they're favourites pretty warmly against Essendon at about $1.30. So that means if they win, I don't think their top 8 market will move that much. If they lose, it will, because all of a sudden they'd be 8, 8 and 1 with a tricky fixture and probably out of the 8. So I'd be holding on Geelong in terms of whether they make it or not.
Yeah, nice one, Daz. I think that's a great hold. I'm holding on Carlton for the top 8. I just think Carlton play Port at Marvel Stadium this week. This is a significant opportunity for the Blues to stamp their credentials for the top 8 once again this year. However, they are running into Port, who have only lost 2 games for the year. So it would be a massive scalp if they were to beat them. I'm a bit touchy on Port's form at the moment. I don't think it's been that great. I mean, they had a little bit of a scare against Gold Coast, obviously being behind at halftime. Essendon almost beat them in the wet at the G. Dan Houston, obviously, on the siren kicked that wonderful goal. So I'm a little bit iffy on Port, which gives Carlton a significant opportunity given they're in form. But I'm just going to hold on them and just wait slightly. But who are you selling this week, Daz?
Selling the Kardinia Park debate, there was obviously a lot of talk. Kardinia Park again under construction. One would argue, when isn't it? But it's under construction again at the moment. And with Essendon going down there was talk, why don't you move the game to the MCG? And I understand the sentiment because A, you don't want to lock supporters out, and B, the ground's not at capacity. However, I still think that the overriding factor has to be draw equity. So Essendon have not played Geelong at Kardinia Park since 1993. How many times do you reckon Melbourne have been down there in that same time?
Tell me, Daz.
23. North Melbourne, 22. And this century, there are 5 sides that have been down there 10 or more times amongst Victorians. You throw the Bulldogs, you throw Richmond, you throw St Kilda into the mix, and all of the interstate sides as well. So it'll sound like a bit of a win session, but I think if you can make a draw fairer, why not? And the fairest way to do it is that Geelong play their home games at home, and there's a balance between who goes down there. It should be Collingwood haven't been there since '99, so it should be Collingwood, Carlton, Richmond, Essendon, St Kilda, just as much as anybody else. I just think Geelong statistically, that the hardest road trip in football is beating Geelong at Kardinia Park. If you never have to go down there, ever, that's an immediate leg up that should not exist in the fixture. It's that simple. If one side can go to Kardinia Park, they all can go to Kardinia Park.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Daz. I think you make some great points. I'll back you in there. I think I've found one of the sells of the century, a big lay, and it's one that you can act on this week. Sydney Swans versus the Western Bulldogs at the SCG. I think Sydney Swans are a massive sell. I'm going to lay them. Since 2018, both sides have been 3-3, so they're quite even. This is an underrated rivalry, obviously, that they played in that amazing 2016 grand final where the Doggies won, and that Doggies was one of the greatest finals campaigns of all time. Look, I just think, why are the Sydney Swans the favourite in that game? They're currently $1.80, $1.85 on the Betfair exchange. Daz, I'll ask you, why would they be favourite?
Probably only the home ground factor, and their last two home games, they massacred West Coast and then drew with Geelong. So people are probably just looking at that.
Yep, so it's only the home ground advantage for the Sydney Swans. But I had a look at how they've been actually playing there this year. They've drawn once, they've lost 4 times, and they've won 3 times. And the clubs that they beat, as you say, were West Coast, and that was a demolition. Hawthorn, who are in the bottom 4, and Carlton, who were completely out of form at that stage.
And the teams that beat them, so the Giants, middle of the road, St Kilda, middle of the road, Fremantle, middle of the road, and now obviously they're up against the Bulldogs, who have had a very similar season to those sides that did beat them. So, it'd take a bit of a turnaround for that not to happen again.
So currently, the Doggies are going really well. I thought they played very well against the Pies, and the Pies were just exquisite in that game. No one was going to be beating them, but they got the jump on them early. I don't think the home ground advantage is strong enough to make Sydney such a short price favourite. They should be closer to $2. So at $1.85, I'm easily going to be laying them. And would look to back them at closer to the $2 range. But I think that's a great lay.
Yeah, and I think that's one of 4 games where there's a bit of value. It's not to say they'll all go that way. The Bulldogs are value at north of $2. Obviously, the D's, $1.84 favourites against Brisbane at the MCG. Can't dispute that Brisbane are in better form, no question. But their record at the MCG is highly prohibitive in a matchup like that. So I think until they prove otherwise, Melbourne represent a bit of good value there. We spoke about Essendon. I think Essendon, not 50-50 against Geelong, but certainly shouldn't be $3.70 as they are at the moment. I think that should be a lot closer. And I think Gold Coast St Kilda is a 50-50 game, and St Kilda are $2.72 in that at the moment. So there's a few sides that are underdogs, and they should probably be even money.
Yeah, well, let's talk about our betting strategies now to round out the show. Is there anything that you're going to have a bet on this week?
Probably there's a multi on offer. They do offer a few of the multis where they're anchored around some likely results. So Richmond should beat West Coast. Hawthorn are probably favourites against North, although always somewhat risky. So there's bets where you can go Richmond, Hawthorn, St Kilda, or Richmond, Hawthorn, Melbourne, Richmond, Hawthorn, Essendon, those sorts of things. So I reckon maybe anchor a couple of those with some of those results that you think might be upsets.
Well, I'm just having a look now. One of the bets I'm doing, as I said before, I'm going to lay Sydney for all the reasons I spoke about in my sell and buy, hold and sell. I'm having a look at the odds now. You can currently lay them at $1.82 on the Betfair exchange. Western Bulldogs are $2.22 to back. And I just think the price discrepancy there is way too big. And given the only reason that Sydney are favourites in that game, who really aren't going that well this year, they're close to the bottom half of the ladder easily. And the Doggies are contending for top 4. I just can't believe the Doggies are $2.22 in that game. And the SCG is the only reason why, and Swans aren't going well.
And you've also got to factor in that Sydney are probably now out of finals contention. Like, they might consider it to be mathematically possible, but realistically they're out. So does that flatten them at all? Do they come out thinking, do we fought the fight over the last few weeks and it's dawned upon us that it's gone? Does that also, because the Bulldogs have obviously got everything to play for?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, the Bloods culture would indicate they'd probably have a crack.
Not. Yeah.
But I don't see why they wouldn't. They've been such a great side for so long. They had a couple of down years there where they were just rebuilding for a new finals assault. But Sydney, a really interesting one. I'm laying Sydney there, and I'm going to back the Western Bulldogs as well. My other back is Christian Petrarca. So 3 bets here. Make sure you have a look at the over-under disposal lines on the Betfair exchange the day of their game against Brisbane. Also look at Christian Petrarca at 30 plus disposals. I reckon you're going to get around 220 to 250 on that, and that's a really confident buy there. I think 30 plus touches is something in his realm, just as long as he doesn't have too much forward time. And then I'm also going to back him in the Brownlow medal market, because if he has a 3-vote game against Brisbane, and I'm hoping they want redemption after that final loss last year, if he has a 3-vote game, I'm going to see him go straight into $3, I think, Daz.
Yeah, I think definitely. Collingwood play Fremantle. Nick Daicos might have a day out, but if he doesn't, then there's a chance that Petrarca shortens significantly.
Wow, that was a big show, Daz, and obviously some massive news with the Stuart Dew. Looking forward to a big weekend of footy. Hopefully you have some luck on our betting strategies. But for all our strategies and a recap of the show, make sure you head to the Betfair Hub now.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.